Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the amazing environs of Upper Kaflia Lake in the dedicated wilderness area of the Katmai National Park, just across the Shelikof Strait from Kodiak Island. The area is a mix of coastal mud flats and steep mountains. The plant life ranges from sedge grass to alders and willow stands. The land is crisscrossed with bear trails, utilized by brown bears over tens of thousands of years to migrate from their winter dens to their feeding grounds along the coast and various bodies of water. Visitors to the area are allowed to acquire visitor camping permits from the park authorities so they can camp and hike in its pristine landscape. Hunting is strictly prohibited, so the wildlife has free rein to live as uninterrupted as possible. It is truly one of the world's most remote and primitive areas that remain untouched by development or disturbance by mankind. The subject of our episode is Timothy Treadwell. He's trekked here for the spring and summer periods of 13 years, and this year has been another remarkable season. Timothy has followed and photographed the area brown bears, many of which he's named, observing their behaviors and temperaments. He pushes the envelope of common sense in many ways, believing that he is so familiar with the bears that they tolerate him and are even friendly to him. He's convinced he's cracked the communication code and can back them down from attacking him by using the intimidating actions and noises they use on each other. He's taking careful notes at some of the bears' favorite fishing holes, noting the various growls they use to communicate their intentions and frustrations. Utilizing similar grunts and gestures, he injects himself into the brown bear community successfully for a long time to study and protect them, according to him. He reported that when he first visited the area, he had sprayed an aggressive brown bear with pepper spray, and the misery of the bear was so severe that he swore off ever using it or even packing it. He didn't believe in using firearms to protect himself either. Treadwell's purpose on traveling to this area is to interfere with potential poachers who, according to him, interlope into the park to harvest bear gallbladders and other parts of bears used in Eastern medicine or as keepsakes. He films them and frequently puts himself in the film shot frames to discuss the conditions and circumstances he observes. He takes the photos and film footage back to California, where he presents the evidence of his findings to school children to increase awareness of the plight of the bears. He frequently performs this service for free and developed a funding base from his foundation dedicated to preserving brown bear habitat called Grizzly People. This is the organization he founded with long-term romantic interest and friend Jewel Palavac. Jewel acted as the coordinator and public face of the organization while Timothy executed the research. In Treadwell's book, Among Grizzlies, based on his experiences at Upper Kaflia Lake, he indicated that he once encountered a giant boar brown bear on a narrow trail surrounded by bush too thick to get out of the bear's way. Treadwell collapsed on the trail face up in fear as the bear approached. The bear simply stepped over him. The bear was so fat from eating salmon that its huge gut sagged down and dragged over the prone Treadwell, covering his clothes and face with stench and fuzz, but leaving him completely unharmed. The summer of 2003, Treadwell's on and off again girlfriend, Amy Huguenard, would visit him and even go observe the brown bears with him, frequently spending time within just a few yards of the most dangerous predator in North America, if not the world. They slept in a tent and sought campsite positioned just yards from the crossroads of local bear trails so they could keep tabs on the familiar characters they'd grown accustomed to. They stored their food in bear-proof steel drums and dealt with the weather and hardship of the area with aplomb and satisfaction. Treadwell felt as if he was performing his purpose in life, and his research fulfilled him. Amy was terrified of the bears, and Treadwell relished the role as her protector, leading her into close proximity of the satiated giants at their fishing holes. She was worried that he had developed a death wish with his obsession and was considering ending their 3-year relationship because of it. She only had a few more days, and they would return, and she could cut the relationship off then. Treadwell typically departed the area in mid to late September, just after the last run of salmon flooded the rivers. This year, he packed his bags and flew out to the Anchorage International Airport to return to California on September 29th. His return ticket was more expensive than he thought it should be, and he got into a verbal altercation with the airline attendee. After the argument, Treadwell and Huguenard decided to return to their campsite for 2 more weeks to wait to see if they could locate a bear he had not seen all summer and wait for ticket prices to decrease. This time frame was pivotal, as it put him in the brown bear's environment far later in the season after the bear's main food source would dry up for the winter. The weather quickly degrades into extremely windy and rainy fall conditions just before winter sets in, and in Alaska, that transition happens quickly. October 5th was another windy and rainy day, the day before the pair was scheduled to leave again. Treadwell had observed the bears that he was so familiar with had all departed, and a new, more desperate population of interior bears had moved in to try to put on their fat for hibernation. These bears tended to be older or in bad shape compared to the bears who had been feeding on salmon all summer. Treadwell and Huguenard were sheltering in their tent, waiting for the storm to blow over so their puddle jumper flight could bring them back to anchorage. The rain and wind battered their tent, but above the normal noise of the storm, Treadwell heard a bear. The unmistakable noise of an approaching bear. He peeked his head out of the tent and saw a bear he knew well. This bear was an older bear that had a very hostile attitude. The big boar had not fared well this season and was underweight and looking for food. Typically, in an instance in which he had to confront a bear, Treadwell would stomp his feet and hiss like the bears did to each other. Just before leaving the shelter of the tent, Treadwell reached down to grab his video camera, but the bear was apparently too close to worry about it. In fumbling with the camera, Treadwell apparently turned on the recording function, but didn't successfully remove it. Timothy stepped outside the tent and tried to drive the giant Bruin off with a bluff. The bear was not frightened, though, and immediately knocked Treadwell to the ground. The bear bit and clawed Treadwell while he yelled at Amy to run away, as the bear silently mauled him. Tim's arms and face were bitten, but his main concern was to make sure Amy would get away. Treadwell was being killed by the bear, and his body was being torn apart. He cried out for Huguenard to help him, and she ran over and hit the bear with a pan. The bear was focused on Timothy and paid her no mind at all. The diminutive woman could not impart enough force to distract the bear, let alone injure it. Timothy yelled, "He's killing me," over, and begged for help, but Amy could do nothing but watch. Treadwell's pleas for help eventually faded as his life was taken during the attack. Upon realizing she could do nothing, Amy panicked and fell into hysterics. She started screaming a shrill scream that could have been easily mistaken as a distressed rabbit. As the bear finished off Treadwell, her screams caught his attention. He approached her, and she was paralyzed with fear, and he killed her as well. The bear would then drag their bodies a short distance from the campsite and cache them to feed off of them as needed. Treadwell's supporter and fellow bear sympathizer Willie Fulton was scheduled to fly into Upper Kafflia Lake to pick the pair up. Willie turned the plane into a descending approach and landed the plane on its floats and tied off on the bank. He noticed the absence of the usual wildlife and began yelling for his friends. As he approached the camp through a trail that parted an alder stand, he saw a flash of movement in the bushes. Since he hadn't received any answer, he grew concerned and returned to the shore and the safety of his bush plane. As he walked back, he noticed a very large bear slowly stalking him through the dense vegetation. Willie quickly entered his plane and flew above the area to take a look. As Willie flew over the campsite, he could see one of the lovers' rib cages with the bear positioned over it, eating from the remains. Willie attempted to chase the bear off by buzzing it in the plane, but the bear would just eat faster. Willie knew what had happened and departed the area to find assistance from authorities. State authorities returned to the area, flown by helicopter pilot Sam Egley. They hiked the short distance from the lakeshore to the campsite, where they ran into the bear who was guarding his cache. The group was armed with various rifles and shotguns of substantial caliber and quickly dispatched the giant man-eater. A necropsy was performed on the 28-year-old bear, and tissues from both Tim and Amy were pulled from its stomach. The recovery party then turned to gathering up the remains of the lovers. Timothy's remains were significantly consumed, and his body was dismembered. His arms were completely separated from his body, and his torso was largely consumed. His spine, hip, and misshapen head were recovered. Amy's body was in similar but better condition. The pair were placed into recovery bags and loaded onto the plane for proper analysis by the coroner. The audio captured during the attack would help the authorities establish the above timeline and would be valuable evidence of the happenings. The recording of the attack was left in the possession of Jewel Palavac, who was advised to destroy it by documentarian Werner Herzog. The later appearance of what was claimed to be the audio tape appeared on the internet, revealing that Palavac had either sold it or it had been stolen from her possession and posted. I will not post a link to this audio file as I cannot verify its authenticity and out of respect for the living family of the deceased. As a former science teacher, I frequently use this incident to pose the question to my students, is this science? Before modern understanding, many naturalists would learn in a manner similar to Treadwell's practices. They would insert themselves into the animal's environment to capture observations and draw conclusions from them. I would like to know if you think Treadwell's practices were scientific or something else. Post it in your comments, please. Research ecologist Tom Smith was quoted as saying, "Treadwell was breaking every park rule that there was, in terms of distance to the bears, harassing wildlife, and interfering with natural processes." He also stated that Treadwell had been warned repeatedly and that this tragedy was not unpredictable. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the wilds of Alaska, just east of Denali National Park in the Talkeetna Mountains. The land is covered with alder and willow bushes, interrupted by tall stands of birches and pines. July is the dry season, if Alaska has one, and nearly 24 hours of daylight. This allows residents and visitors to get out and enjoy the natural scenery and wildlife. Our episode begins with a small group of boys attending a wilderness education program. The boys were soaking up their lessons while attending the National Outdoor Leadership School. NALS is a non-profit global wilderness school designed to develop leadership and environmental awareness in its attendees. Courses range in duration from a few weeks to a full year, and students can earn high school or college credit for successfully completing courses. NALS was founded in 1965 and has taught thousands of young people how to adventure while they learn about their environment and sustainability. The 16-year-old boys of the group were Samuel Boas from Westport, Connecticut, Shane Garlock from Pittsford, New York, and Noah Allaire from Albuquerque, New Mexico. The 17-year-olds of the group were Joshua Berg from New City, New York, Samuel Gotzigan from Denver, Colorado, and Simeon Melman from Huntington, New York. The eldest of the group was 18-year-old Victor Martin from Richmond, California. The boys had honed many wilderness survival skills in their prior weeks and were in the last stretch of their trek. They were navigating through some very thick bushes, as there was no distinct trail to follow to their waypoint. They were very watchful for bears and had been instructed that if they ran into one to drop and play dead until the bear left them alone. The boys were walking single file with Berg and Gotzigan leading the pack at around 8:30 in the evening. They decided to cross a creek to avoid walking through the thick bush any farther. Berg and Gotzigan saw some rustling in the bushes on the other side of the creek, and a large brown bear emerged from the right of the rustling bushes. The boys found themselves in the worst-case scenario for anyone in the backcountry. They'd encountered a sow and her cub. The boys were unarmed, and the 3 adults in charge of the group were trailing far behind, attending another pack of 7 boys who were lagging. The sow immediately attacked Gotzigan, knocking him to the ground with a swipe of her razor-sharp claws. The boy immediately began kicking the bear in a feeble attempt to fend off the enraged mother, hell-bent on protecting her cub. The bear then clamped her jaws on Gotzigan's head and bit him severely. Next, she clenched her teeth on each of his arms in turn, tearing his skin and muscle tissue with ease. Then she swatted and bit him in the chest, which broke 2 of his ribs and punctured one of his lungs. Gotzigan screamed and yelled the entire time he was being brutalized, as the bear snarled and growled at the same time. Then she focused her anger on Berg. She attacked him and bit him as well. She swatted him, raking her claws over his flesh and severely wounding him. Then she returned to Gotzigan once more. Then she backed off a bit, and Gotzigan started yelling to activate the emergency locator beacon to signal for help. The attack happened so fast that the boys were sent into a state of confusion and terror. They had no time to pull out their bear spray that they had been equipped with just for this occasion. Next, the bear attacked Noah Allaire. He was attempting to activate the emergency beacon when the sow emerged from the brush and grabbed the boy and swatted him back and forth, tossing his head from side to side. His lung was punctured, and he was left battered and confused from the chaos. Victor Martin was watching the fracas in stunned awe, and the bear ran over and bit one of his legs just above the ankle before he could even react. Then she disappeared into the dense bush. As soon as she departed, it started raining, as if signaling nature's regret regarding the occurrence. The boys had no idea if she was still lingering in the area, but started to understand their predicament and developed a plan. The boys with the least injuries began setting up camp and immediately began triaging their wounded comrades. They had learned the basics about wilderness first aid on their journey, and they administered first aid as best as they could given the circumstances. They shoved a plastic bag into one of the gaping wounds of Gotzigan's chest and bandaged it with gauze. Back at the emergency dispatch office, the boys' beacon signal was received at 9:30 p.m. and a search and rescue team was organized. Alaska State Troopers were sent to the location indicated by the beacon as well. The rescue team finally located the boys holed up in their tent together at 2:45 a.m. They assessed the condition of the boys and decided that Gotzigan and Berg were in serious condition. The 2 boys were airlifted to Providence, Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage and placed in intensive care. The remaining boys were flown out to the Talkeetna Airport and taken to the Matsu Medical Center in Palmer, as their injuries were not life-threatening. A secondary rescue crew was sent out to locate the rest of the students lingering behind with their 3 adult supervisors. The authorities stated this group was not even aware of the bear attack. They were also searching for the bear just in case the second group might encounter it as well. The rest of the expedition was canceled and the students and instructors were returned to the school's headquarters. School organizers indicated that in the entire 40-year history of the school they had never had a bear mauling. Uninjured survivor of the bear attack, Shane Gerlach, said he is still haunted by the sounds of the attack etched into his memory. The screams of his friends and the growls of the bear echo in his mind. Authorities praise the character and decisiveness of the boys. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a Fogmac island off the coast of southern Alaska. This area is a temperate rainforest covered in a dense undergrowth of ferns and other bushes and plants that commonly close visibility to just a few yards. A very dangerous range to surprise or be surprised by a brown bear, especially one that is bent on revenge. The ground consists of a thick, moist layer of duff and moss, which can conceal even the largest of animals' footfalls from being heard, including those that belong to humans. Brothers Luke and Josh Randall worked at the Fogmac Wilderness Lodge, with many years of experience stalking in this area in search of the giant brown bears the island is renowned for. The brothers had set out to find another gargantuan predator and enjoy the environment they so loved. They had led their client across the scenic landscape and had glassed and observed for the better part of the day. They had seen a few bears, but were looking for a particularly large-sized bear for this client. After all, if a hunter is going to spend several $1,000s in travel, permit, and licensing, as well as guide fees, they want to bring home a trophy animal that they can be proud of. The men spotted a giant bear later in the day and watched it for some time before deciding it would be perfect. The brothers and their hunting client reviewed the layout of the area and decided on a route that would keep them concealed. A concealed approach is a must for fatal shot placement on an animal of this size and violent potential. This would preclude a shot from a long distance due to the potential of wounding the animal and reducing a humane, clean kill and harvest. The brown bears on this island are extremely robust, with their bodies featuring very thick hide draped over a second layer composed of fat and gristle designed to protect them from each other's claws and teeth during battle. Everyday life of these giant bears consists of claiming and defending breeding and feeding areas, so these protective layers are a must for their survival. Beneath this sheath of armor, they also have a thick, dense layer of muscle wrapped around very dense bone. Their protective body structure has been known to stop bullets from penetrating into their vital organs, so shot placement has to be perfect to take them down quickly. As the hunting group arrived at their location, they analyzed the shooting lane that would give them the best opportunity for a fatal shot. Their client prepared by setting in on his rest and drawing his sights upon the most vulnerable part of the bear before slowly squeezing the trigger. The deafening roar of the hunting rifle echoed off of the hillside as the massive brown bear reacted to the impact. The bear immediately headed into the bush for cover and protection. The men were confident in the location of the shot, but not certain. As the light began to fade, they assessed the possibility of tracking a bear that they were not convinced was dead, and they decided to wait until the morning and take up the tracking then. After a night's rest, the men returned to the site of the hunt. They found the bear's trail and began to follow it cautiously. They were pretty sure it was dead, but in a situation like this, it is better to err on the side of caution than to charge ahead and cause the bear to run again, or create an even more dangerous scenario. The bear trail meandered through dense patches of a plant called Devil's Club, which is a broadleaf bush that is covered in thorns. Devil's Club grows in thick clumps and effectively reduces visibility to just a few yards, creating an environment in which close-range encounters are nearly unavoidable. The bear's blood trail eventually emerged from the Devil's Club and rounded a low hillside. The men continued following the blood and track trail until one of them glanced a few yards up the hill above the trail they were on. The massive Bruin was laying there, dead. They walked up to the bear and noticed the giant bear was buried in moss and duff to the point where only his head poked out. His head was resting on the ground and his gaze stared down the trail the men were approaching on. This raised the curiosity of the men, and they completely examined the blood trail they arrived on. The men were extremely surprised to follow the blood trail past the point where they were, then up the hill a short distance and back toward where they found the bear. This bear had set up an ambush over his own back trail and buried himself to conceal his location to catch the hunters by surprise to exact his revenge. The hunters had a deep chill creep up their collective spine as they realized the thoughtfulness the bear had put into this ambush. They pulled the corpse of the bear, and it didn't yet have rigor mortis. For those of you who may not know, rigor mortis is a temporary stiffening on a dead body which occurs a few hours after death and lasts for several hours or days, eventually subsiding. The bear's body was still pliable and flexible, meaning that it had died within the last hour or so. It had concealed itself under the moss and duff and died while lying in ambush for the hunters, a handful of yards from the trail it expected them to approach from. An animal this calculating and vengeful, that plans out a very sophisticated way to gain an advantage over hunters, is nothing short of brilliant. Critics of hunters who think that it isn't fair to pursue this magnificent and intelligent predator have to admit that confronting any bear with lethal firepower is the only way to even the playing field against such a cunning and clever animal.